Hello people of the internet, I'm Zack and you're watching Middle Fantasy, and we're doing another book tag video, woo! This one was proposed by Man Carry Things. Yep, there it goes. And today we're going to be doing how I got started in fantasy reading. This is going to be a lot of fun. I am super excited for this because I love doing book tags. But before I start this video, I actually do have a sponsor for this video. This is really exciting. So this video is actually sponsored by Robin Hobb. She actually invented this new process where you go to the front of the keep. There'll be a guy named App there where you give him some gold pieces and we'll be able to accumulate that and we'll be able to destroy some hedge knights. They're getting a little too powerful, so this is kind of the cool sponsor. So all you got to do to, access this ability with App is all you got to do is to go to the front of the keep, give him some gold pieces, and when it gets too much, we'll defeat some hedge knights, and this is going to be so much fun. So check it out, hopefully soon, because it's getting dark. Yeah! So why don't we get into the book tag? Number 1, what is your fantasy origin story? So we're going to talk about this. It starts off happy, but then some tragedy happens, especially when it comes to this, where I wasn't sure if I was going to talk about this, but I felt like this is appropriate. I was actually going to save it for this particular book series, but because we're talking about it, I think it's something I'm going to talk about. Well, in the beginning, for me, I've always been a reader. My grandma taught me how to read. I remember reading Goosebumps books. I remember reading Series of Unfortunate Events. I remember reading those while they were coming out. Same as with Percy Jackson. And when it comes to fantasy specifically, I remember, getting The Hobbit. Actually, it's funny, like my dad was the first person to get me to read Lord of the Rings. He got so excited because he's like a rock and roll guy. So he would talk to me about Lord of the Rings and he'd hear a song, oh, this is inspired by Gandalf. And I remember him taking me to Barnes & Noble and buying the books and reading them and really enjoying them. And this had to have been when I was 11, 12. And I've always kind of, had that part of my brain that was always there. But when I became 13, got an Xbox and it became all games, I would just pretty much, if it wasn't a video game related, I probably wasn't reading it. So I was reading all the Gears of War books by Karen Travis, a lot of those Halo books, some of them also by Karen Travis. But when it comes down to it, I wasn't really reading much. And this is the era of Xbox Live where I was hanging out with people that I never knew, didn't see their faces. I only knew their voices for years and years and years. And I remember playing Gears of War 2 and Halo 3 with a bunch of these people. Some of them I still talk to this day. And the reason why I bring this up is I remember there was this guy that would always come into our Xbox Live parties back when the Xbox Live party just started to happen. And he would kind of play some games with us, but mostly he would talk about his favorite book series, which was the Night Angel trilogy by Brent Weeks. And he would kind of explain things, and he'd get his other friend who was a personal friend of mine at the time. He would explain things, and when he was gone, this other friend would talk to me about the stuff. And even though I had zero interest in reading it because I felt like this is really, this is not my thing. But I remember one day, basically, I remember getting in the Xbox Live party and my friend was like kind of sad. I was like, what's going on? And it turns out that that one person, I'm not going to be using names in this, just out of respect, but what happened was that person passed away very suddenly. He had some inner demons. I'll just say it like that. And this is the first time as a 14-year-old, because I remember this, was the concept of death was still like, well, what the heck is this? And seeing someone, pass away so suddenly, it was kind of a shock. And the first thing that I did was I asked my mom, hey, can you take me to Barnes & Noble? I got to do something. And I remember getting all 3 books. They wasn't even the omnibus. It was the individual books. And I remember buying those, the Night Angel trilogy by Brent Weeks, and reading the first book, I think in 3 or 4 sittings. And the first book I remember finishing and crying because not the narrative, but feeling like I'm experiencing something that someone had experienced but no longer can, if that makes any sense. And for me, it's always deeply affected me, especially when it comes to that series. I can't stop thinking about that guy every time I think about that series, and I do want to cover it, but that's something I'm gonna have to muster up. And this is something, when it comes down to it, like for me, I understand that when it comes to fantasy, it's escapism. It's pure escapism in many ways, especially when it comes to epic fantasy. And for me, it's something that helps me because I have depression, a lot of other mental illnesses. And for me, having fantasy in this way really does help. And to a lot of people, it does help. And I just want to say that, we're not alone in this. We all have our own struggles, our own inner demons. And there's many, many resources that we can all use. I'm going to have links to some of them down below. But I just wanted to say this is kind of my fantasy origin story. It starts off fun, but for me, it wouldn't be possible to doing what I'm doing right now if it wasn't for that person. And I think about it very constantly, especially with what's going on in the world right now. And for me, it's just one of those things that's such a tragedy that it brings a tear to my eye a little bit. Yeah, that's that's it. And this is weird because I've never really talked about this on camera, so this is wild. And why don't we go into the next question? Number 2, if you could be the hero of a fantasy novel, who would be the author, and what is one trope you'd insist on being in the story? So for me, it would actually be R.L. Stine. I think he's very in tandem to my humor. It can be dry, it can be goofy, and sometimes it can just be black comedy at times. And when it comes to tropes, my favorite trope that if this is going to happen to me is having a completely useless talent that everyone in the party or the group or my group of friends think is completely useless, but there is a moment in the narrative where my really obscure or dumb talent becomes the focus, or it becomes a thing that defeats an obstacle because the thing that you think is useless turns out to be super effective in the end. And I love this trope so much because I love the thing of like the person that they think is the least competent person becoming the most competent, or the person that's perfect for a situation. Like for me, every time I see this in any plot or anything, I always get warm and fuzzy, and sometimes I'll cry when it comes to it because it's just so much fun. And that's kind of the stuff, especially with R.L. Stine. He actually weaves this quite a lot into his narratives, especially when it comes to Goosebumps books, for twists and turns. So he seems like the perfect person. And he has written he's kind of done some, fantasy, or if we look at Goosebumps, it's still horror. It's more, I don't want to say it's a dark fantasy, but I'd love him to write like a straight up just fantasy story. I don't think he has, but I would love to see like his interpretation of what he would do with maybe even portal fantasy would be fun, but who knows? That's kind of the author that I'd love to have. Why don't we move on to the next one? Number 3, what is a fantasy book that you read this year and you want more people to read? So for me, it's actually Grave Peril by Jim Butcher. This is the 3rd book in the Dresden Files, and for me, this is still one of my favorite books that I've covered so far, because for me it has a lot of moments in it that I really do enjoy, and it's a good jumping on point. And also, if you like you're wavering with the Dresden Files, this is really, for my opinion, where it really kicks off and you really start to get really into the adventures and the mysteries of Harry Dresden. And it's one of those where I recommend it every time people are looking for a good book and they get horribly confused when I bring up the Dresden Files and like, was there a sci-fi show? And I say no with a straight face because I'm lying horribly. Why don't we go on to the next one? Number 4, an upcoming fantasy release you're excited for. So for me, if we're going fantasy, for me, I'm excited for The Lost Metal by Brandon Sanderson. This is the last book in the 2nd era of Mistborn, so the Wax and Wane books. I'm excited for this because this is gonna sound really cynical. I'm excited for it to be over so we can get to Era 3, which is not really a spoiler, I guess, because he's talked about it in great length because each era is, a different time period. But it's the 1980s, and I've been so excited. As much as I like Wax and Wane, I actually want to see it kind of concluded, because out of all this, the last book was, 2016. I remember reading it and being like, that's it? Where's the rest of it? Like the Zuko thing. So I'm excited for that release, and I can't wait for when that comes out. I guess that really, he's going to finish it probably by the end of this year. So we'll get it very, very soon, hopefully, and I'm excited for this, so that's what I'm looking forward for. Number 5, if someone had never read a fantasy book before and asked you to recommend the first 3 books that come to your mind as a place to start, what would it be? So for me, I think it's also like a matter of taste, but the first 3 that come to my mind is The Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss, Mistborn Era 1 by Brandon Sanderson, and Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. I think all these are very much branching into different versions of fantasy, whereas if you're looking for beautiful prose, KKC. If you're looking for action but also has some fun twists and turns, that's Mistborn Era 1. I think for me that's a really good introduction to fantasy, and really to show the genre that it isn't just dragons and wizards. You can do a lot of crazy things. And when it comes to Spinning Silver, it's a good standalone book, and I think Naomi Novik does a really fun job with the idea of the twists and turns of the traditional fairy tale, and literally, no pun intended, spinning it on its head, really. And you're getting a lot of things when it comes to these books, and for me, it really depends on the person, but these are the ones that sprout to my mind. I could give more examples, but it's a matter of preference. You pick your poison and you see what they like, and then you give them some more suggestions. Why don't we get to the next one? Number 6. What is one misconception about fantasy that you would like to lay to rest? So I think the biggest misconception that I get when it comes to fantasy is that fantasy is for kids. No, it isn't. I think when it comes to fantasy, the genre is more of you're exploring different elements. It can be, I guess there's, the adult fantasy, but I consider all fantasy in many ways. But when it comes down to it, I think when people think of fantasy, they think of the traditional fairy tale, but let's look at Grimm's fairy tales for a moment and you'll just get nightmares. German fairy tales don't F around. When it comes down to it, you're exploring, a different genre, and also you can take a lot of different genres like mystery and action and put them together in a fantasy book and really explore things, especially when it comes to fantasy. You can explore characters. This is why I love the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson, is he takes a lot of things about, characters exploring their flaws and their imperfections and really molds them together like this. And for me, I love that, especially when it comes to things like depression, trauma, survivor's guilt, or even when it comes to characters, what does it mean to be powerful? If you have magic, are you going to use it for the good reasons, or are you going to use it for bad reasons? And when people think of like fantasies just for kids, most of the most popular stories ever are fantasy related. If we look at the Greek myths or even Norse mythology, it's all fantasy in many ways, and it's things that were passed down. Look at Shakespeare. If we go to the the big bard himself, like A Midsummer Night's Dream or Macbeth, like you got witches, wizards, ghosts, goblins, fairies. And that's kind of the thing that's always kind of irked me a little bit, is it isn't just baby stories. Even if you go back to those baby stories, they're like watered down from different translations to become not weird, but if you actually read them, they're hardcore, man. Why don't we get to the next one? Number 7, what is your favorite fantasy genre? So my favorite fantasy genre is epic fantasy. The reason why is I love world building, I love characters, I love books that are so girthy that when it comes down to it, you're just going for a slow read, and you're exploring this world, you're really stepping into this new land, and you're understanding currencies, politics, religions, these characters, and I've always loved it for this way. This is why I love Song of Ice and Fire, I love the King Killer Chronicles, I love the Stormlight Archive. I could just keep going on, but it's really just going into these worlds and really kind of living there. I mean, I guess with the Song of Ice and Fire, if you're maybe not during the actual narrative, it might be a pleasant place to live, mostly during the summer. Not during those long winters, though. Yeah. But you see, like, when it comes down to it, it's just fun to escape into those worlds and really just have fun and see a person's like idea of what would be a cool land to be in, or a different planet, or a different race of creatures would be. And for me, I love that. Number 8, what subgenre have you not read much of? So for me, it's portal fantasy. I didn't even know the term until someone brought it up to me, and it's something where it's, someone goes into a portal and goes to a magical land. Personally, for me, I've never really read those, and maybe because I'm kind of like reading things where people are already in media res, but I've watched plenty of movies, like the Masters of the Universe movie. I guess that's a portal fantasy, yeah. Where it's like every 80s movie where it's a fantasy land for 5 minutes, and because the budget, that's how much you got, and the rest of it's on Earth. Like things like that. For me, I haven't really read, but that's something I'm thinking about getting more into. If you have any recommendations for where I can even start with that, I'd love to see, because for me, I don't even know where to start. I actually can't recall the last time I've read one where a kid or someone steps into a portal and pierces the veil and goes into a brand new land and tries to get home. I guess there's, if I'm thinking of the first thing that comes to my head is the anime Zero no Sakaima, or The Familiar of Zero, is the thing I think about for portal fantasy, but other than that, I don't know. Number 9, what is one of your auto-buy fantasy authors? Well, it's Patrick Rothfuss. It's an easy answer. And number 10, how do you typically find recommendations? Now, for me, how I find recommendations is going to be very simple. I usually go to used bookstores or Goodwill or any thrift shop, and I'll pick up books with covers that are cool to me, and I'll buy them. Sometimes I'll get recommendations from YouTubers that I like, but normally it's me getting blind picks or seeing things on Goodreads and doing it that way. When it comes to my preference for reading. It's gonna sound really shallow, but I like covers, so I'll read a book based off of its cover. You know, you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but that's kind of the main promotional marketing material. But also at the exact same time, you know, because now that I'm on Twitter and everyone's connected, I'll see people talking about certain books, and I'll read those. Though it's funny because recently a lot of the books I get really excited about are usually based off of YouTubers that I like they write their own books. Like the one that comes to my mind right now is Lindsay Ellis with Axiom's End, and her next book that's coming, I think it's called The Divine Truth. Like sometimes, like one of my favorite creative people are the people that write books. Another one I think about is Hello Greedo, and he wrote a fantastic book about life called Sorry About the Mess. So I just find books based off of things that I like, but mostly based off of covers, especially when I go to the store, where if I go to a Barnes & Noble or I go to like a major bookstore, I'll spend 2 to 3 hours, this is even hyperbole, just looking at books and not making a decision until the last minute. Where the first time that I read the Mistborn I was doing this and I literally last minute, because I had to go to like an appointment or something, picked it out randomly, didn't even look at the cover. Thankfully I got the first book, and actually I guess I checked first if it was the first book, picked it up, remember running to the appointment and reading the prologue to that and just, you know, hitting the ground running for that. So sometimes for me, blind picks are a lot of fun. I have books on my shelf, like not on this shelf, that have been there for years upon years upon years, and now with the TBR that I've kind of started to do very loosely, keep adding to it, that I'll add books and I'll just pick books at random to talk about and review, and that's fun. Then that's how I usually do my recommendations. Usually I don't look at book reviews, I'll look at how many stars and I'll just kind of skim, but for the most part I just go through the blind pick and even look at the back of the book and just see what's the synopsis and what's going on here. I do the exact same thing for anime and TV shows. And sometimes it's a hit, and other times it is a swing. More baseball stuff. Don't know why. And that is going to conclude this video. Wait a second, I gotta do some tags. This is so much fun, I've been prepped for this. So the people I'm going to be tagging is Caffeinated Covers. I don't need this. She is a really fun YouTuber. She does a lot of Dresden Files stuff, and we have been friends for a little bit, so it's so much fun. I'm actually interested to hear her thoughts about this and kind of what her origin story is. So if you're out there, totally do this tag. This will be a lot of fun to do. I really recommend that. Why don't we go on to number 2? David DeCero. David's a really fun guy. He does a lot of grimdark stuff, so I'm recommending you, bud. I want to hear your origin story. I think you've done one of these before, kinda, but I want to see your fantasy origin story. We're gonna have the prequel before you get to the main series. Let's do it. Or maybe for you would be a novella. I don't know, but I'm recommending you, buddy. And the last person I'm going to be tagging is Scott Liu. Yes, when it comes to Scott, he does the Blue Lotus channel, and he helped me with the amazing Bridge Crew workout video. He's a great guy. I'm interested to see what his origin story is and how he got started. So I'd love to see what you have to do with this, Scott, and kind of hear your origin story and where you began and fantasy has ended. Or not ended, but I guess also began? I don't know. And I think that's going to conclude the video. Well, everyone, thank you all so much for watching this video. If you liked it, maybe consider subscribing down below. Here at Middle Fantasy, I'll do lore deep dives, I'll do book reviews, we'll do discussions, I'll do comedy bits, and even sometimes we'll do just random miscellaneous things that I find fun. Well, everyone, thank you all so much. If you like this video, maybe consider liking. I'd really appreciate that. It helps with the algorithm and those bots I have no clue about. I just know that there's ones and zeros and bleeps and bloops. In your opinion, when it comes to the comments, comment down below. What are your favorite picks? What did you think of this video? Is there things that are like, you know, broken in the back of my background? Love to hear that. Well, everyone, thank you all so much. And like always, may your food and drink ever be tasteful, and may your books be filled with fantasy and adventure. Bye, everyone. See ya.